Everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. Happy Wednesday. I'm so glad you're here. And it's been a busy last few days for me. I know some of you have been asking where I've been, and hasn't been intentional with not doing as many live streams. But I've got four small kids with me, and it's a handful, but they're a joy. But it's kept me from being on camera as much as I want to be. But I'll be doing a lot more very soon, and this next week should be pretty much chock full of great monologues and live streams and call-in shows and interviews. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And just wanted to mention as well, if anybody wants to share their story on this channel, please feel free to reach out to me. All the ways to connect with me are beneath this video. And also, if anyone is interested in one-on-one peer support, I'm doing that as well. And if anyone is interested in signing up for the next Poetry Slam in a couple months, let me know, and we'll get you on the roster for that. And pretty much anything else you need from me, feel free to reach out. I did just want to mention, though, on that note, I have been advertising, obviously, that I am looking for people to reach out to me for, especially for the interviews. And I have had an overwhelming barrage of responses to the point that it's almost ridiculous. I can't respond quick enough. And if I did try to respond quick enough, I would literally stop everything else I'm doing. So it's a good problem to have. But if you could, please, if you've reached out to me, please bear with me. I will get back to you soon. But there's just a lot at the moment to respond to. So appreciate your patience with me. And we're going to have we have a special guest today. We're going to be speaking with Dylan. Dylan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Nice to be here, Tim.
Yeah, Dylan Adams is here with us. And Dylan is from rural East Tennessee. And Dylan grew up in an evangelical Southern Baptist environment and was homeschooled. I can certainly relate to that. I think we're going to have a lot of similarities with Rebecca and all that and Bob Jones. Dylan earned several major degrees, including a Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry, a Master's of Science in Pharmaceutical Sciences, and a Doctor of Pharmacy degree. Wow, you have been in school for a very long time, and I'm sure it's amazing when you finally get that degree. And Dylan is also a residency-trained pharmacist working in a hospital setting. We're going to go over a whole bunch more about your story, but before we do, could you just tell us more about yourself and some fun things, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, so I currently practice pharmacy. That's something I'm really passionate about. I always love learning, and it's been a lot of my education getting to that point and getting trained for that. So I really enjoy what I do for work. It's really fun to work with patients, and the doctors and nurses and everybody else. It's nice to be a part of that team. As far as like personal things for me, I play a lot of guitar. I like to mix cocktails. Those kinds of things are really fun for me.
That's awesome. Very cool. And you're
Listen to a
still
lot of
in,
music as well.
and are you still in Tennessee?
I am, yes, sir. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee right now.
Okay, nice. Very cool. Not too far away. I'm down here in just north of Atlanta, Georgia. Well,
Okay,
we're
cool.
so glad you're here. As always, as you know, we love to hear people's stories. If you could take us back, what was it like growing up, and especially what did you hear about Jesus and salvation and the Bible and all that?
Yeah, so I grew up in a house where like my parents were always Christian. Like that was just growing up, that was always the case. That was the case their whole life and their parents' whole life, more or less, as well. So that was kind of like my experience growing up there with that was like the general kind of Christian aspect of the household. It was just always there. I grew up in actually originally the first few years of my life, I grew up near Atlanta, Georgia, in Woodstock. So that's actually where I was born. Was right around Alpharetta, Georgia,
Yeah,
Marietta, that kind of area. That's where
nice.
I'm originally from, and then most of my family's from East Tennessee, so we moved back there. But growing up, going to church, we went to First Baptist Church Woodstock, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Tim. So that was my church for a long time, and then for a period of time, um, even like in my college years, there was a lot of virtual watching of that as well. So that's kind
For, I
of
mean,
that was
for anyone that doesn't know, could you just give a brief overview of how big that church is?
so it's like it's a big mega church. I don't really know all the numbers or anything off the top of my head, anything like that. But even as a kid, I subjectively knew like this was a really big church. It's massive church.
Yeah, I've been there a couple times. Do you feel like you're walking into a bit of a small sports stadium at that point?
Exactly. And whenever I was there as a kid, they had the old building, so it was even smaller than the big one, which came later. That's kind of interesting. But yeah,
Yeah.
we moved to East Tennessee, or like around when I was like 7, um, around that age, somewhere around there. And I wouldn't have called myself like I don't think I had that. I didn't get saved. I didn't have that moment that a lot of kids in Christian households do, where they like get saved. I didn't have that until we were in Tennessee. I went to like a smaller Baptist church in East Tennessee. Um, but I really do remember one day because it was something my parents always were talking about, but they really wanted it to be our decision to like finally have that literal come to Jesus moment. And I kind of knew it was important and stuff. And I remember one day I was like probably 7 or 8, and it hit me really strong. Like, oh, I need Jesus. It was like this, I need it. Like, this is what I need. I have to make this happen right now. Like, this needs to happen now. This is a big deal to me. Um, I don't know if I'd kind of been put up to it in some way before. I don't remember any of that, but like, I certainly remember like the growing kind of desire. And then one day it just hit me like really strong. Like, I need Jesus. And I understood, what all that meant at the time. And my parents went through that with me whenever I went to talk to them. But I remember there was like a lot of celebration whenever like I went into my parents' room. And I was like, Mom, Dad, I want to get saved, or whatever I said at that time. I don't really remember the specifics, but I know like I told them that's what I was wanting and that's what I believed. And so they made sure I understood what the gospel was, and Jesus died for my sins, that I was a sinner, that I needed to be saved because, I had done wrong in the sight of God, and I needed Jesus to cover up my sins. And in whatever way, as a little kid, I understood that whatever language I used, that was what I believed. I believed the gospel, like very straightforward, regular evangelical gospel. I know you've heard as well.
So I assume that they were also warning you that if you didn't believe, you would be on your way to hell when you died.
So that wasn't a big like emphasis in our household. I think my parents grew up with a lot of that hellfire and brimstone kind of preaching, and they were not. They didn't want to like do that again. I think they did always believe those things were true, but it was like that was not the helpful thing to talk about at church as much.
Right.
More emphasizing God's love and Him trying to save us from this horrible thing. Not God's going to send you there if you don't do this. It was less of that energy.
Right.
Um,
But technically
but
still
I
there in the back
Yes,
room
always
is
in
the
the
actual.
background.
It's crazy. Just a quick aside. It's crazy to me how so many churches have been doing that more and more. I've noticed that shift, and it's almost like they want to kind of be like, "Don't look behind the curtain," kind of the Wizard of Oz kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And it frustrates me because you're really getting kids to believe in a context where they're really not aware of the full story. And I know that there's been so many people that have talked about how when they read through the Old Testament, like really read through it verse by verse, for example, they were really shocked at other things like, wow, God commands, for the children of Israel to slaughter everybody, but keep the young virgin girls
Hmm.
alive for themselves, and then make them shave their
Yeah.
heads and take them as child brides. And like that's a command from Yahweh, not like God will
Yeah.
allow it, but like I command you to do it, or this is how we take slaves and beat them. And I think a lot
Hmm.
of people get shocked to realize like, wow, there's some bright stuff, like Jesus loves me, this I know, but there's a lot of dark stuff in there that's really
Yeah.
scary and horrifying. And I wish they would be just more open about like, okay, we're going to give you the good stuff, but we're going to give you the bad stuff too. I mean, when I was growing up, that was the way it was. Like, let me give you the bad news first, then the good news. You can't have the good news till you know the bad news. But now it's like Jesus just wants to be your special friend. It's like it's crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's more the energy that I had. Jesus is your friend. God loves you. God's trying to do right and good for everybody because He loves everybody. And then I'll get to it in a little bit, but when I read the Old Testament, I was like, oh, that's just not true. That's just not true if I'm believing the Bible.
yeah,
Either way.
exactly.
Um, yeah, so I'll talk about that later. That came much later when I read the Old Testament completely. It was quite eye opening. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that hell and damnation was all in the background for sure, but it wasn't it wasn't like the forefront. But I was definitely scared of those things. Like to this day, I still have a little bit of fear of hell, and that's like probably been the longest lasting effect from all this. That was something that was definitely taught frequently in church was hell, just not in a hellfire and brimstone, God's going to punish you kind of way, but like a, you need to get right with Jesus or this will happen to you out of your own fault kind of. That was the kind of vibe. But yeah, so I grew up in that household. And, I was a kid. I wasn't like super into every little thing all the time as a kid. You'd go to Sunday school and you went to church, and I enjoyed children's church, and you'd make friends at church, and And then for me, being homeschooled, it was really important to have friends at church. Um, I can talk a little bit about homeschooling. I think that'll go into like
Yeah.
as in my teenage years when I really started to be more serious about God. Um, but yeah, homeschooling, so that was something. I was homeschooled from kindergarten all the way until I started college.
Wow.
So I had never been to public school. I've never been to private school. I've been in my home my whole life
And
until like I went to college.
how many kids total were there?
So I have two older brothers. There's a little bit of a gap there, and then it's me and my sister, and we're
Okay.
the younger ones. I'm a little bit
Okay.
older than my sister.
And you all were
Um,
homeschooled all together?
all of us were homeschooled.
Wow.
Yes, we all were. Now my older brothers, there was like a few years when they were younger that they went to like Christian school, but my mom was really big on not wanting us to go to public school. Um, she had this idea that like the education might be poor at a public school, and she didn't want that for us because education was like really important in our house. Um, but a lot of it was shielding you from the world, you know, the world and those kinds of things, worldly things, the way people are in public school. Oh my gosh, public school. It's like prison, but real life for kids. That's like the way I was thinking about it. It's kind of how you're implicitly taught to think about it.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone was trying to deceive me or do wrong by me or anything like that. It's just that was definitely, as a little kid, you kind of be like, oh no, they go to public school. Oh my gosh. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's
Well,
how I felt most of my life.
I think a lot of Christians, and I see it even to this day, a lot of them really feel like anywhere you go is basically indoctrination. It doesn't matter where you're. If you're in public school, it's indoctrination towards godlessness. If you're in Christian school, it's indoctrination towards, you know, godliness, but a little bit of, there's a mixture in there. And then, of course, if you're homeschooled, we can just protect it all, make sure that we just shelter you in a hyper sense and keep all the
Mhm.
bad stuff out. But yeah, it's crazy how much it's so like black and white. And it's been interesting to see in recent discussions about how I've seen people talk about this and say like there's a lot of Christians that have gone into the public school to be teachers to make a difference. They've put their own kids there. They're trying to, in their minds, shine their light, and then they see other Christians saying, public schools are always awful. They're like, wait a second, I'm here and I'm shining my light, and there's actually some good stuff going on here. But it's, when you're homeschooled and I was the same way, like you think they're all secular,
Oh, yeah.
godless people, they're all Satanists, behind the scenes.
And I think and that was definitely like some motivation, I think, by my parents, but a lot of it was they were worried about education quality. And then the other thing is my dad traveled for a living. And so sometimes it was convenient to just go spend time with him a few months somewhere across the country while he's working out there. Because he would try to like fly in every week. And sometimes it was easier just to go out there for a summer and just hang out with dad for a few months and wherever he was working. And so that my mom, it started to become a thing where, oh, this makes sense because we can do this on the road, while dad's working. And so there were definitely practical reasons for it. And it worked for us. All in all, I got a very good education. When it, I mean, I got to where I am. So I think that speaks for itself.
Your mom
And
must have been
my
pretty smart, because how did she do with teaching the really advanced classes?
so what we did, I don't know if you know this, but Abeka Books, which sounds like you're familiar with, but it's a curriculum and they have these like video lectures. And pretty much after the first few grades, my mom heavily relied on those for our education.
Okay.
Um, so I got like a classroom teaching experience in some kind of way. Especially in high school and middle school, that was more important to have that. So my mom didn't teach those advanced classes. My parents actually, or my mom didn't actually go to college. It's not something that she did. So she was really trying to push for like better education for us because she didn't feel like she had that when she was growing up. So it
Right.
was all very, very admirable what she was trying to do. Um, but yeah, it definitely impacted a lot of things because in Abeka's curriculum, they're a very right leaning Christian evangelical organization. And so I was taught stuff like in my science book about how evolution is BS. I was taught how, maybe some untrue things about the Civil War and why it happened, or
Yeah.
some less than savory comments about Indigenous people here in America. Just really loose things, and I've seen some old pages of these things now on the internet, and I'm like, ooh, I remember reading that book when I was a kid. So some of those things were problematic, but in general, I felt like the education was pretty good. My writing, math, all of those things were good. But
Hmm.
one of the components we had every day was like a Bible class. That was one of the videos we had, and there was like a little book. It was one of your daily classes. You had like an hour of Bible or whatever it was. Um, and so a lot of the doctrines that you typically associate with much more evangelical, fundamentalist type Christianity, that's what I'm being taught every single day. In addition to like for a period of time, I was going to night services on Wednesday. Oh, and I'm going to Sunday and Sunday night. There were periods of time where my family was doing that pretty regularly. And we're going to a Baptist church. And so I'm getting just an endless stream of like fundamentalist type teachings.
Hmm.
And so it's very interesting. I think by the time I was a teenager, in some ways, I was more fundamentalist than my parents were because, like, I was a King James only person there when I was a teenager. I was like, this is the only Bible for me. This is the only one that God inspired. I definitely
Hmm.
believe that.
That's
In fact, I
interesting that you
remember
say
getting
that.
into,
I'm sorry, again.
I was just saying, I remembered getting into like a little bit of an argument with my Sunday school teacher one time when I was a teenager or kid or something about how a King James version was better than NIV or something ridiculous that I know better now. But um, it was just funny. And so that's the kind of flavor of Christian I was.
It's interesting. I can definitely relate to the idea of feeling like you're more fundamentalist than your parents. I wasn't quite as fundamentalist in the teenage years, but by the time I got to college, I went to Bob Jones University for my freshman year, which is similar genre as Becca with Pensacola Christian College, and my parents actually asked me to leave because they had kicked my older brother out for something, and Bob Jones hadn't done a very appropriate job of how they kicked him out. They made it very public and spread the word everywhere at the time. When we're talking, something 30 years ago or something, but they spread the word to a whole bunch of pastors and everything. And so my parents were like, they really shouldn't have, that was, wrong and shouldn't have done it. And so they asked me to leave after he got kicked out. And I was like, I like this place. I'm staying. And I was realizing, like what you're saying, that like, I think I'm actually more fundamentalist than they are. And I think they were kind of hoping for a reason to get me out because they were like seeing that trend. And this was like a perfect door. Like they were really concerned about what happened, but they wanted me out. But thankfully, I did end up myself leaving after the first year. But it is crazy to think about how you can. I mean, they really do go after you as kids with
Mhm.
these messages of like you can change the world, and you get that power in
Oh,
your
yeah.
head of like, oh my gosh, I could be a preacher soon. I just have to get my
Yeah.
ducks in a row theologically, and I'm there.
Well, and I'm right. And I'm so lucky that God blessed me with the truth, Tim. That was the way I thought about it. Even these other Christians, some of these other people, they get it wrong or they get it close enough, but like I got it more correct. And I think that's something so many of us do, especially when we're teenagers. Oh my gosh, I thought I knew everything
Yeah,
about the Bible and all that stuff.
goes right to our heads.
But yeah, and I don't want to say like I was extremely more fundamentalist. There were just certain kind of really fundamentalist teachings, like the KJV only stuff. Some of those little things, sometimes I would be more than my parents on. But in
Yeah.
general, is a pretty fundamentalist household. But the emphasis was always on love and Jesus' love for us and trying to do right by other people. That was definitely the emphasis in my household.
Can I ask, did you, when you
Um,
were just by yourself talking to God, it's just you with your devotional time or whatever you would have called it, did you feel like it was not just what you believed personally and as a family, but that there was like a relationship of sorts with the God of the universe?
I think I think in some ways, yes. I think I always struggled to feel like a genuine connection with God because I'm like, well, where is he? I don't hear him. I don't see him. I don't feel him. And I did feel like on some level I was missing a little bit of that connection. But I thought it was because of spiritual weakness, especially like when I was a teenager. This is when I was really becoming kind of serious about God there for a while. I was reading my Bible. I read the Old Test or the New Testament all the way through um, in the King James version as well. And it was becoming very important for me. I started to like think about creationism more and like, okay, how do I prove this? Or how do I prove the Bible is inerrant? These are the things I'm starting to think about. And I'm sorry, your question was,
Just more about the personal side of it. Did you feel like you were really getting close to
yes, yeah,
God?
I was struggled with that. But I was starting to really, in this time period, that's whenever I was starting to get closer to God. Um, but it was definitely difficult, but I felt like it was a sense of spiritual failure that I wasn't more close to God.
Yeah.
And being a teenager, I was a teenage boy, so you know what teenage boys do. And that was like a continuous shame, and I felt like that was somehow like pushing me a little bit away from God. It was this constant like fighting this, going back and forth. And you know how it is. It's
Yeah.
what teenager boys do. And but that was a really serious thing I carried on me. Like I am a horrible sinner. I need God more. I would cry about it. I would pray to God for forgiveness. I would fall down on my knees in my bedroom and pray to God to help me and forgive me. And realizing that I was a hypocrite every single time.
Yeah.
And that started to really influence my shame, which is a huge part of like my story as well, is like all
Yeah.
the shame that I felt because of this. Because now I
Mm.
realize, what I was doing at that age wasn't there's nothing really wrong with that in any kind of way. It's just what's what people do, right? It's what just people are wired to do. Um, and it's not abnormal, it's not a sin, it's not any of that stuff. It's just, something that happens. But at the time you felt like I deserve hell for this. This
Yeah.
is horribly evil, and if God can just see it to save me, I'll be so happy.
Yeah, I think a lot of us too, with the fundamentalism that you mentioned, a lot of us get to the point that we start to really be concerned when we're in the context of church and youth group and all that, where we're saying to ourselves, not just that I want to be theologically accurate, but I want to be on fire for the Lord. I don't want to just live a casual Christian life. I don't want to be lukewarm and have God, threaten to spew me out of his mouth. No more Laodicea for me. I want to be on fire for God. And I really do want to be a game changer. I want to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. And so when you do end up feeling like whatever the quote unquote sin is, that it's sort of like it's like God saying, "Are you really on my side or not? Do you really believe that I'm the Savior and the Lord, the Master, or are you the Master?" And
Yeah.
boy, that fight, and of course in Christianity, as you mentioned the word shame, it's always our fault. It's never God's fault. He's never set us
No.
up to fail. It's
No.
never like he's not set us up in some way to make sure that we end up looking bad any way we turn. It's always our fault. And I think that really gets to a point where you kind of, in many ways, end up having to live a double life, because you end up, um, 1 second here. You end up living a double life where you have a public life where you look like you're kind of holding it together, and you have a private life where you kind of are like admitting to yourself, I don't know how close I really am to God. I might be close.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the normal Christian life is, I mean, look at the children of Israel. They kept falling into sin and God restored them. And maybe this is normal, but maybe it's not. And maybe ultimately I'm really disappointing my Father in heaven. It's a hard
I
journey.
can I can definitely relate to that, because a lot of those struggles or things that I was going through or things I felt guilty about, those weren't things you could see on me. And I think I had this misconception that other people were the real Christians in some ways, and I was like a fraud. Like but I was trying so hard. I was really trying so hard to be better and to do better for God. Um, and I wanted to be like, what does God want from my life? It was very important for me, because I'm like, what God wants is the best. It's the best thing. And that's what I should go after. I know some of this other stuff may feel like this is better for me. That's just my the heart is deceitfully wicked. Who can know it? My mom would say that all the time.
Oh,
Um, and that is something that I was like, I can't trust myself. I can't trust myself ever. And to this day, like that's something I've had to work through, is like learning to trust myself and trust my feelings, and not be like thinking I'm just got this wicked, deceitful heart that doesn't know the truth.
yeah,
No.
exactly. Mm. So the worm theology really got deep into your heart. That's just like mine. Um, did you end up feeling, as you're going through all that, that there were at least certain times and seasons of, I guess we would call them spiritual victory, where you're like, I'm on the mountaintop, God and I are, real good.
I think so. With how my family was homeschooled, and sometimes we weren't always the church going family, due to certain church dramas, and there might be a period of time we kind of just screamed, some old like First Baptist Woodstock stuff or whatever. And so I didn't feel as mobile, like I could go out there in the world and do a lot, because I was kind of feel like I was stuck at home a lot. But at least personally, I was really trying to like arm myself with knowledge. Like I was starting to one of the biggest things for me was creationism for a while. I was a very sciencey minded person. I don't know if you could surmise that about me from what you know already, but I was a very sciencey person. Loved science, loved math, and all that kind of stuff. And I needed to make creationism make sense. And so you go to your, I had the Answers in Genesis books growing up. I remember watching Ken Ham stuff. You know, or some other organizations I'm thinking of. But there's a lot of those organizations or people talking about these things. I started to really consume a lot of that, and I'd have all these questions. Like one of the ones that really stumped me for a while, and then I found this really BS answer on Answers in Genesis that kind of somehow explains it. But it was the one that bothered me the most. Was okay, if those stars are a billion light years away or whatever it is, and it takes light a billion years to travel here. Well, doesn't that mean the universe is at least a billion years old? Those are the questions that I would start to have those kinds of ideas. Like, okay, well then why do these animals look so closely related? Oh, I guess God just created them that way. But for some reason they are very similar in all these biological reasons. Why? Just because God did it that way. I don't know. When the obvious answer is evolution.
With the light, where you the light from the stars, where you told that story about how it's the appearance of age, like he created not just the stars way out there, but he created the light in the as if it's in transit already.
Created it on the way going. Yeah, that's a really funny one. I like that one. I did hear that. One of the answers I got to, I forget it now. It's something about gravity causing time dilation or something. I don't know. It was some really in the weeds explanation that I'm sure was not based on any real physics at all.
Yeah, I think weed is the operative word there.
But yeah, so that was really important to me. So I'm kind of proving those things. I'm starting to learn more about, arguments for God. I stumbled across some videos of like William Lane Craig and Ravi Zacharias, and I remember just like tearing those up on YouTube. I was like, yeah, let's go watch this. Oh, William Lane Craig, he's such a brilliant guy. He's so smart. He's got all these great points. He knows so much about the Bible. And those types of people started to really make me feel like, yeah, I got a good reason why I believe this. This makes sense. The moral argument, the cosmological argument, the Kalam cosmological argument. It's a classic from William Lane Craig. I had all these like arguments that you do whenever you learn apologetics. It's the same. It's the same playbook every time. It's the same few arguments, and
yep.
I really felt like I was arming myself to when I became an adult to go out there and be able to share the gospel, because and to share what's true about why I'm more correct and with the Bible, why I'm doing God better service by believing these things like creationism. I'm doing right, and I wanted to share that, and I felt like I wanted to learn all I could in order to share that appropriately, especially as like I would go on to college. So college was where I was going to this liberal college. Those professors are going to try to convince you of all kinds of stuff. I got that kind of energy from my family and some of my extended family and other people. And the reality was, I went to like a Baptist affiliated Christian liberal arts school. It was super just the bastion of communism and atheism.
Exactly. So more of the same, basically.
Yes. So before I get into like some college stuff, it'll kind of tie into that. But one of the other things as I was a teenager that I was really beginning to struggle with was like realizing that I was different in some way, especially when it related to like sexuality and myself. I just began to have this understanding that I was not like other people. I kept it very hidden, very to myself, and I didn't feel like it was a natural part of who I was. I felt like it was a sin. It was like this curse that was on me because of original sin. I felt like this is my thorn in my side, like Paul has. This is my struggle. This is the thing that God's going to have me struggle with in my life, is this part of me that's not like everybody else. With certain desires I had or certain ways I wanted to present myself, I just it should be very obvious, like now that I'm transgender, and that was a huge part of my identity that I was just beginning to work through in this time. That's something I had desired, and I'd realized that had been the case my whole life, but I'd really started to understand it better when I was a teenager, and then especially into college. And so I think that's important to keep in mind going into my college years, because that's a huge, huge source of shame. Huge source of shame, because
Mm.
that's not how God designed us to be, right? That's not God's plan for a family. That's not God's plan for marriage. That's not God's plan for who you're supposed to be. Because
Did you have
apparently everybody knows what I'm supposed to be. Um, but I could say something like, well, what if God wanted me to be this way? But it was like, no, 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 no. God wouldn't say that. He said it this way that I'm saying.
did you have
So
anyone you could talk to about all those topics at that time frame, or was that just a completely solo journey for you in your mind?
it was basically a solo journey until I was, you know, more than halfway through college, until I started
Mm.
opening up about it with friends. Some of my close friends to this day are really supportive of that, and we've all kind of had our deconstruction as well.
Yeah.
Very interestingly, but yeah, they were very supportive about that kind of thing. But for a lot of years, it was a solo thing, and I never felt like it was right. I always felt like I was somehow wrong for feeling this way, like I was wanting something that was sinful.
Like you
And
would
of course, now I
like you would get over it at some point, kind of like you might say,
yes,
oh, you're struggling with, porn or something. Oh, I'll get over it
yeah,
and give it to God.
yes. But like I know now that these things don't go away. They don't go away at all. That's just part of who you are, and there's nothing that can change that. You just have to learn how to accept that about yourself.
Yeah.
Um, there is no ex-gay anybody. I mean, I don't know. Do you know who Christopher Yuan is?
I don't think so. I might be.
He's like a really well-known like conversion therapy guy, and he's supposedly ex-gay, but even he admits that, well, he's not really ex-gay. He has holy relationships, is what he calls it. Um, but someone like him, that was kind of, well, I thought you could do that. I thought you could get to someone like him. Like, yeah, like if he can be cured, then I can. You know, I really did think about it as I need to be cured of this. I would pray to God for so long, crying out to God, God, just please take this away from me. Just I don't want this. I don't need this. This is not what you want for me. And it was painful, because I felt like I related to Paul in some way when he's talking about that thing that he wanted God to take away from him, that thorn, you know? Um, so yeah, it was a big struggle. And going into college, I really started to understand more about myself there. But yeah, so I started college. I was going into the mindset of becoming a pharmacist, which I managed to achieve, thankfully. And so I was majoring in biochemistry. And so I was taking a lot of biology classes in college, as you can imagine. And while my school was like Baptist affiliated, they didn't really breathe down the necks of like the sciences. They let them kind of teach their thing. But there was this weird, like, kind of hush hush mentality about certain topics in biology. Like, hey, don't record this lecture. I don't want to get in trouble with whoever. Oh, hey, like, don't talk about this stuff on campus too much. You would get some of those little comments from your professors sometimes. Because someone on the board of trustees or something who is really fundamentalist, they would get all huffy about it if, oh, they're teaching evolution in class. Someone would get upset about it. So there was kind of hush hush, but they still taught it. They still taught proper good science. And we didn't really focus on evolution a lot with at least what I was having to take for a biochemistry degree. So I didn't have to deep dive into evolution quite as much as like a true biology major did. But I still took a lot of I still took like things related to genetics and um, microbiology and cellular biology and all these things. And you start to see a pattern. I started to understand, oh, this is why they think evolution is true. But I know it's not, because here's the explanation. And so I would constantly ask these kind of loaded questions to my professors in the middle class, like, okay, well, if this is this way, then why? Trying to like make some what I thought was some intelligent point about how it must have been designed. And then of course it wasn't such a smart point most of the time. And my professors, this is nothing new for them. They live in, I mean, it's a small East Tennessee town and a Christian university. They're used to having a student like that probably every single year, at least. So, I thought I was going to be unique and argue for like what I thought was right. And I definitely believed in creationism. And I was not afraid to tell people that, and to tell them why I thought that. But over time, you know, um, I began to realize, oh, this is all like really adding up to evolution. Oh, wow, this is really starting to add up. And just by attrition over time, I start to see how every aspect of biology, whether it's morphology or embryology or genetics, or like all these things, just perfectly line up with the same explanation, with the same explanatory power, with robust science behind it. And it kind of occurs to me one day in college, it was probably the most important day in my deconstruction, to be honest, because it was the first domino, as it is for a lot of people. I've noticed, um, not because in and of itself, like believing creationism is, I think, super important to being a Christian. It's just you realize how wrong you could be about something. You know, the one
Yeah.
day, like I remember sitting on the bench in like outside on campus somewhere, and I was just dealing with this realization that, oh my gosh, like either evolution is true or God has made it seem like it is. Because this is ridiculous how obvious this is. And and nowadays I obviously believe evolution is as a fact as anything in science. I mean, it is an objective fact the way the earth is round. I mean, it's that level of fact. It's not a controversial thing at all. And I was it was this was so difficult to come into this realization because I'm like, well, the Bible was wrong about this. Okay. Well, okay. What if the Bible wasn't wrong about this? It was just I didn't understand the Bible correctly. So I'm researching people, different scholars, and I tried to find a way to make this fit. I was like, okay, like it's an allegory. This is not exactly what the Bible is saying, yada, yada, yada. Okay, that's fine.
Right.
But then I'm like, okay, but who was the first human? What about original sin? What about life being perfect before the fall of man? What about no violence and carnage with all the animals? What about, all these things you start to question? You're like, it doesn't make sense. Why would God create a world with all this suffering for like millions and millions and millions of years? Just this untold horror show that is this world. Why would God choose such a ridiculous and horrible way to create us when he could have just popped us into existence? Um, those questions were starting to come up in my mind. And it was the first time I felt like I was even remotely getting toward a criticism of God. That and like thinking more about hell. I'm like, why would God do that? So I'm starting to get these internal criticisms going, but I quickly try to put those down and, you know, do the classic, well, I don't understand. God's ways are higher than mine. There's a lot of that too, to kind of cope with me having legitimate questions that I needed answering.
Yeah. I think a
But
lot of
that
us,
was that.
a lot of us go through that. I think it's a great point to make is that we try so hard to not go to the level of like escape. Just escaping Christianity is just so hard. It's not even like we're trying to intentionally to avoid it. We just know that Christianity has to be true. Therefore, we have to just shift our form of it. And I'm sure I don't remember exactly how I did that in every which way, but I'm sure I did that in several levels. And yeah, like maybe the earth, maybe it's, one day is as 1,000 years, is 1,000 years, is a day. And maybe that's the 6 days of creation, etc. Um, it's nuts how you go through all these hoops and you cannot cannot come to the point of just admitting for a lot of us for so long, just saying the words, maybe my whole worldview is just upside down. Maybe it's just
Oh yeah,
completely erroneous. It's
it's one
crazy.
of the most difficult things, and I think I'm really going to explain the depth of that feeling when I finally realized the whole thing was all made up. Um, but I'll get to there in a minute. But so I was really trying to work through these questions I had. So I remember going to my New Testament professor's office because you had to take an Old Testament and a New Testament course and some other stuff and go to chapel and all that stuff, which I know you're familiar with. Gotta get those chapel credits.
Painfully so. Chapel and Vespers.
Yes, yeah, that kind of thing. For we had similar types of things at our school, and so but yeah, I went to his office. He was like the cool, like sort of liberal, but still like a very good Christian guy. He was like the cool professor. He'd come in class and he'd sit up on the table, and he didn't want to be. He didn't want to go by his last name. He just like, oh, just call me, my first name. Just call me this. And he's somebody I feel like I could talk to, because when I took his class, I feel like I learned a lot about the New Testament that I didn't know. And I thought he would be a good person to talk to about it. So during my New Testament class, I learned a lot of the first, just the basic stuff that I think, from my understanding, everyone learns in like Bible college or divinity school or whatever. Is you learn like, okay, how did the Bible come to be? Textual criticism. Okay, like what about these other Jesus figures around the time? Okay, what does inspiration mean? How do people think of it? What have these teachings been historically in the church? You start getting an introduction to those ideas. And I sort of realized how much more the Bible was than I was allowing it to be. Like, instead of smushing all the four gospels together as one story, I was realizing, like, in a radical way, whoa, this is like so interesting. Mark has this to say about Jesus. Luke has this to say. John has this to say. And they're unique things that need to be looked at in their own ways as well. And I just remember thinking like, oh, I've cracked the code on the Bible. I appreciate this in a way most people I know don't. And I come to find out this is basic information. This is not anything deep. But to me, it was like profoundly deep. It was life-changing. So I had felt like in his classroom, there was a safe environment for me to like learn new things about the Bible. And it didn't necessarily have to conflict with my faith or be like I was challenging the Bible or God or anything. It was that I was just learning. And so I went and talked to him about this question, and I was ready for him to give me the answer. Oh, here's how this works with that. But he actually, I don't think he believed in creationism. I think he was a lot more liberal than I realized. He just didn't say that stuff out loud because of obvious reasons. But I remember I asked him, I was like, okay, well, who was the first human, and like, how did original sin work if evolution is true? And he's like, I don't know. And it blew my mind, because I'm like, you're supposed to know. You're a New Testament professor. Like, someone should have figured this out by now, right? And that was the first time where I didn't feel like I got an answer. And I never did. I never did get an answer. No matter where I looked for it, people didn't have a good way of putting it at all. So that was like a really important. So it was the most important part of my deconstruction, was that realization, was I can be wrong about something. I can be so incredibly 100% incorrect about something so obvious and so easily demonstratable. What else am I wrong about? What else am I not understanding? So that was my first taste of that, and realizing that sometimes there is not an answer. And that was, I think, the reason I was able to really begin to deconstruct after that. That was when I really started my deconstruction.
I love it. You're putting the words in my mouth of my journey too, and so many of us. I think that's the starting point, is when you learn a few things, and those things are important. But the bigger thing is that it's teaching you is that you might be completely wrong, or that you might have a very significant lack of information or of connecting the dots. And you probably heard me use that phrase, scope for the imagination. But a lot of us we just had no ability to fathom, maybe, just maybe, there's so much more to this picture. Our world was so small as Christians, and our perspective was so narrow, and we had blinders on, and we had no idea. We thought everyone else had blinders on, and we didn't realize we were the ones. I think that's one of the most amazing things. And some people share it like in the context of what you're saying, or maybe they'll say, I went on a missions trip and I met some Buddhists that were much happier than Christians have ever been. And it's like, whatever it is, something shakes you up and says, there's a lot more to the human journey, a lot more to the human story than you know. And you have to, you have to be willing at some point to take stock of where you've been so far and to say, maybe, just
Absolutely.
maybe just maybe I need to start over. And it's the hard thing because of the sunk cost fallacy. You're just like, I've been so sure. I've been on the mountaintop preaching it. I've been calling everybody to my light. My light's been shining, and you all have to come to me because I've got the truth. And all of a sudden, you have to basically apologize. Either publicly or at least for sure in your head, and say, "Wow, was I wrong?" And that's so hard to do. And for a lot of people, I think it's almost like it's a pride issue at a certain point. Christians are so used to talking about how they're so humble, and humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and He'll lift you up, that kind of stuff. But you realize, like, to deconstruct takes the ultimate humility, where you're deconstructing literally everything and saying, maybe the world, maybe I'm in the upside down, and to do that takes so much bravery. It really does, and I commend you for doing it. Commend everyone for doing it, because it's hard, especially when you realize that it's not just your pride that's at stake and your certainty that's at stake. It's the reality that this is going to
Mhm.
cause some significant loss in my friendships,
Yeah.
relationships, and man, oh man, for anyone
Even
going
just your
through it,
personal well-being too. Like
yeah,
my personal well-being was, and I'll talk a little bit about this too, but that was definitely a component of this. Like these things are upsetting on a deep level to people when you realize, um, because like I was afraid, like what, like I was simultaneously looking for the truth and worried I would find it. You know what I mean?
yes,
Um, it, it's, and I was worried about salvation. I was worried about like, what if I come to what I think is the truth and it's actually the wrong answer and I've just screwed myself? I would worry about that kind of stuff too. And so there's always like this, like coming up to it gently, like, okay, let me just not get too close to that, and barely think about this. I don't want to like go away from God any. So I'm going to be really careful when I think about these things. Or you would want to hear it framed from a Christian perspective. You wouldn't go straight to the atheist or straight to the whoever who is criticizing it. You would go to like, oh, this person said this, and here's their response, you know? And I felt pretty content with that for a while. I think I think when I really hit the big stride of my deconstruction was in pharmacy school. And I'll get to that here in a second. But at this time in college, it was really around the same time, honestly. It was really starting to occur to me like, oh, I know what I am. Transgender people were just starting to become like a really big thing in the news and controversial, like around 2015, which is when I started college. That's where I was a freshman in college, and you started to see stuff about that. You started to see people talk about it, and I most of my socialization and stuff was online. Like I was on Discord, I'd play games and stuff with my friends, and look at a lot of websites and things. And so you're kind of in the cultural milieu of my generation. It was like the internet, and that was how I understood the world, was through the internet. And you'd start to see about these people's experiences and these people's lives and what these people felt and what these people wanted. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like me. That's me. And it was clarifying, but also um, scary, because then it's like, oh no, that can't be me. I can't be this. I can't be trans. I can't like guys. I can't. These are. I can't have that. That's not what God wants for my life. But this had been something growing in my mind for a while, and I was starting to like try to figure out a way to make it compatible. So just for a little context, my house was definitely, I would say, this is just objective, not trying to be mean, but my mom was pretty homophobic. Um, I'd hear comments growing up and stuff, and you'd hear it at church, you'd hear it in your classes, just negative things toward homosexuality. And so I definitely believed that. I was like, yes, homosexual relationships are wrong. It's not wrong to have those feelings because you can't control that. It's wrong to act on them or to dwell on them too much. That's what's wrong. Don't lust, don't do any of those things. You had to be celibate if you were gay, in my opinion. That was like the proper course of action.
right,
Um, that's what I was taught and what I believed. And trans people didn't even come up in all that time. And then now trans people are in, and I'm like, okay, is this different? Is it like a medical thing? Like the Bible doesn't really talk about this. And in a weird way, I was almost like, okay, I can be trans, I guess, but I'll just make sure just so I don't accidentally foul up, I'm going to remain celibate. That was like my what I thought as like a college student was like a genius way to get around this. I'll still be a Christian, I'll still love God, I'll still be on fire for God, but like I have to deal with this medical thing. Is the way I was trying to frame it in my mind so I can make it make sense. But even then I was still like super trying to do right by God, even as I was having this realization by myself. And that was very painful because I felt like I simultaneously needed to be myself, to be my full self, but also that's not what God wants for my life. And God knows better than me. So I need to do that instead. So
Hmm.
this is a very messy time in my brain on all these questions that you can imagine, whether it's my religious things or my personal identity. These are things that are really, really doing a number on me. And in college, I was definitely very depressed. Very that case in high school as well, even middle school. I've been depressed most of my life until like I finally was able to be myself. Um, for a lot of reasons. And a lot of these things had to do with it. That feeling of shame. You just learn to hate yourself. You learn to feel like you're not worthy of anything. You learn to feel like I would be better off dead. These are all things that like you're implicitly taught, even if they don't mean to teach you that. You know, like you have this idea of like, yo, you're such a, you're a great kid. You do awesome. I'm so proud of you. But also like you're this terrible, horrible sinner. It's this weird thing that doesn't make sense. It's this that definitely was the case. So
Hmm. I can definitely relate that. I think a lot of us would say too that it ends up being like I mentioned the double life of you're sinning but you're trying to keep a public spiritual life, but also that double life of the worthlessness. Like you feel like you're so worthy in Christ, you're so worthy because you're a child of the King, so worthy because of the gospel, because he's declared you righteous and he's someday going to completely glorify you. But you also feel like such a sinner and such a just you're letting down God all the time. And I remember one of the verses that really hit me hard as a teenager was there's a verse, I forget the reference, but it says, if I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. And I remember
mhm.
specifically asking my youth pastor, like, does that mean that God literally doesn't hear me? And I forget the exact how he sliced and diced it, but I was like afraid that literally like until you confessed your sin, that you could be in a in a car that had just plummeted into a pond, and
Yeah.
you're trying desperately to get out of that thing before you're drowning, and like because you had sin, God literally can't hear you. And obviously now the whole thing is just ridiculous beyond words, but like, that was it. You just felt like you're disappointing God, and man, oh man, the worthlessness when you have this mixture of worthiness on the belief level and worthlessness on the worldview level, and worldview always beats world beliefs. Your worthlessness comes out, your sinfulness, your worm theology always comes out one way or the other. And man, oh man, it's painful stuff. I hear you.
And I didn't go ahead.
I was I'm sorry to hear too about the depression. I can relate to some of that, and I know that makes it much more difficult, especially knowing that people are going to Christians, the troll Christian trolls are going to attribute your depression
Yes.
to
Correct.
the reality of you being trans and to the reality of questioning Christianity. It's like, well, there you go. You're depressed because you
Mhm.
haven't given it all to God.
And that's the thing, like the more I gave to God, the more I was trying to get away from it, the more depressed I got. Like it was having the opposite effect. And I was trying so hard to be what God wanted me to be. It was I tried so hard, but it's just something that doesn't go away. And I realized that. But yeah, so this is like at the point when I'm getting ready to leave college, and I had a girlfriend toward the end of college, and that kind of reignited some of my faith too a little bit because I was like, oh, I'm going to be a strong couple. We're going to be a strong godly couple. We would do like Bible studies together. We prayed together. Um, we 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 were a good Christian couple. We were not going to do anything before marriage. That's not godly. So we didn't. Like and I do like girls, so that's one thing. But I do like girls and guys. So like I did really love my girlfriend. It wasn't like I was not attracted to her or anything. I definitely was. But I was trying to be like a good Christian. I was like, okay, we're not going to do that. This is not what God wants. We're going to do it right. And that was something that was really important to me as well. And I think I should probably touch on purity culture a little bit because I think this is important before I go into the next stage of my deconstruction.
Yeah, please.
So, purity culture was definitely something, I don't think it was ever referred to that way or emphasized in like it wasn't like the biggest thing in our house, but it definitely came up a lot. My mom would kind of have this opinion like, oh, we need to be with like good girls, you know, like, and nudge nudge, wink wink, don't date a slut. That's what my mom was trying to say. Um, and and by that it would have been anyone who's like had sex before marriage, basically. Like, try to avoid that. She would say this all the time. I'm sure you know that line on Star Trek when he's like, boldly go where no man has gone before. My mom would
Yeah.
say that all the time when talking to
Oh my
my
gosh.
brothers. And it's cringe now when I think about it. She thought it was funny, but it's cringe when I think about it now. But that is kind of the mindset that we had. It was this othering mindset. Like, I definitely internally looked down on people who had sex before marriage. I definitely looked down on those people. I didn't mean to, but I did. And that's very implicit in a lot of purity culture. And I think that's the thing most evangelicals are most judgmental about is sexual purity. Absolutely the most judgmental about, because I know I was the most judgmental about that. And so I took it really seriously. And that's why whenever I was a teenager and I was doing what teenage boys do, it really, really made me feel bad. It really made me feel like I was being a hypocrite, you know? And that leads to a lot of shame and guilt as well. But yeah, that was purity culture was like a definitely a big part of growing up in a lot of ways. And I think I noticed it more thinking about my sister now, how I participated in that with my sister, unfortunately, like trying to protect her, like, if she's with her boyfriend, I'd kind of just like look in and make sure like nothing was going on. That kind of thing was happening sometimes. I remember just because I cared about it. I thought purity was good. And I thought I had believed in this almost like I've heard people talk about it recently in the prosperity gospel around purity culture. Like, oh, if you do
Yep.
what God wants you to, then it'll be like marriage night, honeymoon night. It'll be the best thing ever. It's going to be wonderful. Your relationship's going to be blessed. Your sexuality is going to be blessed. All these things were kind of told to me, and that's just a bunch of BS. I mean, that's not how it happens. And when you hear to these deconstruction stories from people talking about purity culture, it had really messed some of these people up, even after they did it all the right way. They still, it wasn't like they had this great sex life or anything, or great marriage necessarily, just because they didn't have sex before marriage.
Yeah.
Um,
I
that
remember
was
reading
that
a
was definitely a big part for me, was purity culture.
remember reading a book. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it was a book that related to this a little bit. But the person was talking about how people had come to the author and talked about their experience with purity culture, and that essentially that what was happening was this repeated motif of these people were doing it right, like you're saying, they were getting married, but then when they would eventually get to a point where the marriage was falling apart because they were so ashamed of it all, that they would go to counselors and kind of talk through their story as to what brought us to this point. And the common motif was that they had sort of pledged with the virginity, culture, and the signing of the little cards or wearing a little purity ring or whatever,
Hmm.
that you pledged your life to your father or to Josh McDowell, and all these people, and you pledged it all to them. And in the process, you grew so ashamed, like you talked about, that eventually when you do get married, you can't flip that switch and you just feel so dirty. And now you
Yeah,
feel like you're letting certainly your spouse down, you're letting yourself down because you thought it'd be so wonderful and it's not, and you don't know how to move forward. And now you kind of want to die because you're like,
yeah,
this is like the biggest way I was going to glorify God was through a godly marriage and get being a godly parent. And I don't want anyone touching my body now because I felt like I'm so impure. And man, purity culture has done such a number on us. I mean, that's one of many different ways, but it's so sad to think about people waiting that long and they finally get what they thought they wanted, and it just blows up in their face because of this messaging.
I think for me, especially like someone being queer like myself, I think purity culture was the single most damaging thing I was taught. If I really boil it down to how it affected me, I think that was the worst.
Mm, mm.
And
No,
and it wasn't like my family was this super intense on it. They were just like everybody else, pretty much, where I'm from, it was rural East Tennessee. Everybody thought that.
Hmm.
That was just the
So
culture.
as you were going through the part of your life that you're talking about there, had you at any point at this point really firmly concluded anything about Christianity's truth claims yet, or like where were we in the timeline with that?
Not yet. I think I still was a Christian. I still believed in God, and so I'll explain kind of as I go into pharmacy school. That's whenever I during my personal time I was starting to read some of these things whenever I had the chance or listened to videos or and but yeah, I think these were like almost two parallel things happening. Ultimately, the reason I'm not a Christian anymore is because I don't believe it's true, not because of any other thing related to it. In fact, those things came way after. I was no longer a Christian before I decided to transition, um, and it was way after. It was way after the fact as well. So yeah, so with my girlfriend, that was definitely like a big emphasis for us, and we didn't work out and like all that stuff. And I went to pharmacy school after, and it was pretty hard losing your first girlfriend. So that was also my first girlfriend because I'd been so sheltered growing up, just like not going to school and stuff. So that was my first girlfriend too. So there's a lot happening there in my mind as I was starting pharmacy school and I was moving away for the first time um, because my college was just a few minutes up the road from my house. So this was like the first time I was going out on my own, was going to pharmacy school. And so,
Hmm.
it's another 4 years of school. I just did my 4-year degree, got a BS in biochemistry, and now I'm off to do 4 more years of pharmacy school. That's where I got my master's. I did this dual degree thing, and so that's why I got both there. So I got my doctorate uh, in pharmacy school. But while I was doing that, during my free time, I definitely had, I was starting to think a lot more about Christianity again and really understand it better and feel like I was being more intellectually honest with it. But I was still very much a Christian, you know. Um, so for me, with my queer identity at this point, I had kind of buried this deep down. This is something I was openly like saying to my friends, "Hey, I think I'm trans," for a while in college, and then I like kind of shut that down for like some personal reasons. And then I got a girlfriend. That was my way to cope. Was I got a girlfriend? I think. So whenever I got to pharmacy school and I'm by myself again, I kind of buried that issue. Like I almost tried to forget about being trans. It's like, yeah, it's just not. That's not going to be a part of my life. It's just not gonna happen. Just threw it away. That's just childish, fantasy, and that's not okay. We're just gonna move past that because I'm an adult now, and I need to get on and be a man. I got to man up and do my thing. And so I'm in pharmacy school, and I'm learning all these things, and there's a big emphasis on evidence-based medicine in pharmacy school. This is like so crucial. And this is a continuation of the message that I got in my science education in general, which was that you need evidence before you believe something. Your belief should be based on the evidence and the best evidence that we have. And if you don't have enough evidence for something, then you just say, I don't know. That's what science is about. It's the most humble form of intellectual honesty because you're basing things on facts and you're okay with saying, I don't know. And so I always really looked up to science. And as I'm getting into pharmacy school, the things I have to do with patients, the decisions I have to make, the things that I recommend to doctors need to be based on evidence. They need to be based on solid science, solid studies, because if you're not basing what you do with these medications on science, then you could kill somebody. You could hurt somebody. You could do all these things. So we need to make sure we're trying to understand the truth. And that's what science is about. And that was the corest of the core belief that I had about life was I want the truth. I want the truth no matter what, even if it's horrendously awful and not comforting at all. I want to know the complete truth because the truth's important in and of itself. So that, and to this day, that is a core value of mine. It's why I consider myself a skeptic. It's because I care about the truth. Um, Going to pharmacy school during my free time, I was still very much like a Christian. I even started to go to church a little bit, where I was in pharmacy school. And I started to consume stuff from other traditions. I started listening to Catholics. Do you know who Bishop Barron is? Robert Barron. You may have heard of him.
Yeah.
He's become more popular in the last few years, but this was like years ago. I was starting to find him and get into him, and I was like, wow, an articulate, educated person who's not um, a fundamentalist, who clearly really cares about the Bible and Jesus. I was like, he doesn't seem like a dummy. And I started to be interested in listening to like some Catholic ideas. I started to listen to all kinds of different sources, and I started to. I was in the beginning stages of realizing that the Bible maybe not is not inerrant. So that was
Slippery
kind of the
slope.
next big
Slippery,
step.
slippery slope right
That's
there.
the that's the next big step too. Yeah. So yeah, I started reading. I started getting accustomed to listening to the other side. I was like, okay, like I'm a mature adult Christian now. I've learned all this stuff. I know the apologetics. I know the arguments. I have a much more nuanced view of the Bible now and stuff. And I'm going to listen to these other people argue, these atheists. I'll listen to some of these atheists. But the ones that I kind of avoided because they were very offensive and brash, and I just couldn't tolerate them, were like your typical Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and people like that. I just couldn't. I looked down on them because it's like, why are you so angry at me? Um, you don't have to be so disrespectful. But I stumbled across a YouTube channel of a guy called Alex O'Connor when he was a relatively small channel. I know you know Alex O'Connor is now, but it was when he was a pretty
Right.
small channel at the time. Whenever I discovered him, I mean, he's like a little younger than my sister, I think. So, he was like a teenager when I started watching him, I think. And what I loved about his stuff was he treated all claims with respect. He's like, all right, let's like look at this, you know? And I remember thinking, oh, this guy's like a charitable atheist. He is one that's going to be intellectually honest. And I got the vibe that, oh, if Alex really did see the evidence, he would believe this. 100% he'd be a Christian. And he became my kind of my benchmark for type of content I enjoyed listening to, was stuff like that. And so I got introduced to like how these philosophical arguments for God were easily debunked, like very easily. And I started to see that, like the moral argument, which I thought was so powerful, terrible. The Kalam, terrible. Lots of these arguments are just terrible. They don't really prove anything. There's such easy counters to them, but you never hear them from the Christian apologist ever. And then whenever you do actually hear that in a debate, they kind of just sweep it under the rug and don't address it. It's something I notice every single time, and I could legitimately not think of a way to counter some of these things they were saying. I'm like, yeah, that's a good point actually, but nothing was changing in my mind yet. I was just starting to articulate and understand that, okay, well, maybe I don't use that argument then. Maybe that's not a good one. But they started getting ticked off left and right. And then you're like, okay, I have like so few arguments for why I think this is true left. And over time, you start to unpack more. And so I was listening to a lot of his content and content like that from other creators, that genre of content, that kind of skeptic to atheist content. And meanwhile, I was also looking at, I was learning more about the Bible. And to this day, I still love learning about the Bible. In fact, I'm reading one of Bart Ehrman's book right now, Know Thy Stranger. It's very good. It's a positive message about Jesus, and I think it's great. I love that
Nice.
book. But Bart Ehrman was like a super important figure, as he is for a lot of people. He's the classic like figure people learn about the Bible from in a radical way, which is really not so radical. It's just basic scholarship, from what I understand. He's not saying anything crazy. He's saying the basic facts about what scholarship believes and why, more importantly, what the evidence is and why we think this. And Bart Ehrman probably did more for me than any of those people. It was Alex O'Connor and Bart Ehrman were probably the two people that I think had the most impact on me deconstructing, for two very different reasons. I read Misquoting Jesus, and I knew a lot of that already from my New Testament class and from the other personal reading I had done before. But it was really wonderful to see um, such a full understanding of that. And then I read his other books, like my favorite one is How Jesus Became God. That's my favorite of his books.
Yep.
Wow, that was a crazy one. So for the viewers, like in that book, he basically, Bart Ehrman shows that and demonstrates that the historical person, Jesus, almost certainly never claimed to be God like he supposedly does in the Gospel of John or other Christian traditions. And there's a lot of reasons he unpacks about why that is most likely the case. And I found it very convincing. Like this was very well articulated, very well thought out. The evidence was there. And I was seeing the synoptic gospels in a way that I hadn't before. I was like, oh yeah, these are like, none of these are claiming Jesus is God. Not one of them. There's no verse in the synoptic gospels claiming Jesus' divinity. Not one time. And the basic heavy hitting argument from that book is, okay, if Jesus was walking around claiming he was God and that was something he was doing, why is that not in our earliest source, but it's in our latest source? you know and I thought about that. I'm like, dang, that's
Makes
a
you wonder.
really good point. This would have been 100% in the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah.
If he was actually saying this would 100% be in the Gospel of Mark.
Mm.
And you start to realize, okay, like, did Jesus never claim to be God? Okay, well, he could have still been God because he just didn't claim to. Okay. And you used another thought removing strategy to keep yourself from seeing the obvious truth, right? Well, Jesus still was God. He just didn't claim to because it probably wouldn't have worked out really good. And like he wanted to keep some things hidden for a while and it was all in his perfect timing and yada, yada, yada. You have all these explanations for everything. Um, and these things started to accumulate. I just learned more and more about the Bible. Then I know something you talk about a lot that I learned too was like how lots of these Greco-Roman like myths and stuff are basically the source material for lots of the works that Jesus does. And that a lot of ancient stories did this type of thing to build like relevance to their audience, to show like, yeah, this guy's a god. See, look, he walked on water. He turned water into wine, just like such and such god or whoever. You started to see those similarities, and you began to have that realization about the New Testament that like, oh, this is just like also the same thing. This is myth. This didn't happen. So I'm having that realization about the New Testament. And then meanwhile, I'm also like trying to read the Bible for the first time completely, all the way through. I've read the New Testament several times at this point, but I'm like, I'm going to read the whole Bible. And I don't know, who Father Mike Schmitz is? Are you familiar with that guy?
I don't think so.
He's kind of like a more like, oh, I'm the cool priest, I'm hip, guys. He's one of those kind of priests, but he's very earnest and he seems very nice. But he did a Bible in a year reading. Okay. And I read the Catholic books too on top of this, just for the heck of it. And so I listened to him read through the Bible, and we're reading through the Old Testament. And Tim, you know what happens next when you start reading through the Old Testament.
The walls came tumbling down.
Yes. And you realize how horrific it is and how God is evil in the Old Testament and how he does and commands some of the most horrible things. I would catch myself at moments when he would be reading the text through audiobook, and you could almost hear like the implicit cringe as he would say some of these things, like as he's reading off the text. And then he'd come back around and explain why it wasn't so bad, even though it sounded that way. And I just remember thinking to myself, dude, just say it's bad. Just say it's bad. I can tell that's what you believe. I can tell that's what you feel in there. And the way you're talking about this, that is what you think is true. You know this is wrong. You know that these passages in Exodus about slavery, you know this is evil. You know this is supremely evil. And God allows this and commands it. You know God telling them to kill every man, woman, and child is horrible. You know God saying take the virgins for your own is horrific. One of the worst things ever. And God is allowing this and commanding this. And I'm just starting to see the Bible in a whole new way between what I'm learning about the New Testament, what I'm seeing in the Old Testament, learning about the philosophical arguments, learning about the wider Greco-Roman world and what spawned Christianity. Tim, one day it just hit me. It just hit me like all of a sudden out of nowhere. I was like, oh my God, this is like all bullshit. And it was the most devastating realization in my whole life. It was, I mean, it just shattered. Like, just my mind was spinning for like an hour after this. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is not true. This is all made up. This is all a lie. My whole life, I believe this is literally the case. Real, actual history. And it's not. Talk about having a mind. I mean, you know this. You've been through that too. It's quite the mind shift. It's quite the change. And it bothers you in a very deep way because all of a sudden I'm finding myself like, I don't know how I feel about anything now. How do I know what's right and wrong? How do I know about like what happened? Like how did we all get here? You know, these questions start popping in my mind that I don't have answers to anymore. And that is whenever you're a fundamentalist minded Christian and you have an answer for everything, or you attempt to have an answer for everything, now you're in the territory of you don't have any answers. And it's a scary time. It's a really scary time. Yeah, that's then after that, it was done. There was nothing, there was no coming back after that realization. I'm done permanently. Like there is no way I could be a Christian again after what I know about the Bible and about the evidence or the lack of evidence for all these claims, like the resurrection and all these other things.
About how long was the process for you between when you first had the thought of, oh my gosh, this is garbage, to the point where you just said, I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic. There's just no way.
I think because I had that realization, I intellectually knew that's what that made me. But I think it took probably another few months, maybe a year, before I really felt comfortable calling myself an atheist. Because that's what I am now. I'm an agnostic atheist.
Yeah.
If God exists out there, I'm willing to be convinced of that. I'm willing to be convinced Santa Claus exists, but I haven't seen the evidence either. You know, that's how I feel. I'm willing to believe anything if you can demonstrate it to be true. I'll believe anything.
Right.
But I need evidence. That's what skepticism is about, and that's where I came to. And so the next chapter begins of, you know, picking up the pieces.
It's amazing just to reflect for a moment on that part of it. And by the way, if you're okay with it, I'd love to take a quick pause and go through a few comments, and then we'll get to the rebuilding of your new life post Christianity in maybe 5 or 10 minutes here. But just to comment, it's an amazing journey, and it's so weird, and it's such a mixture. I forget exactly how you put it earlier, but it's such a mixture of this is so horrible and wonderful at the same time. It's like it's so horrible that I've been deceived. Mm-hmm. And it's so horrible that this is going to ruin relationships, to realize the truth of Christianity's origins, that it's just man-made. But it's also wonderful to get my life back. It's also wonderful to not be living in a delusion. And it's such a bittersweet thing. And the bittersweetness is not like, it doesn't end just because you don't go through a bittersweet month or two and then you kind of get past it.
No,
the bittersweetness is always going to be there. And I think so for so many of us, the big question, which I'm sure we'll get to in a little bit as we talk more about your story, is in many ways it's like, well, I can't recover the time, but how do I make my life, even though it's not transcendently meaningful, how do I make it meaningful from this point forward in some way that's at least meaningful to me and meaningful to the people around me? But let me read a few comments here, and then we'll jump into the rest of your story. Thank you all for your patience. Again, when I do the monologues, I'll jump in more frequently to the comments, and certainly when we do call-in shows, I'll jump into the comments. When we do interviews, we'll just jump into them once or twice throughout the time. But Deleting says, Christianity really does keep you from your true self. Yep, absolutely. Jonathan, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Shell is in the house. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Jade, oh my God, I can relate so much to the demonization of public school. Yeah. I mean, as a public school teacher, I will say there are quite a few concerning things. Yeah, especially in Texas these days. Jonathan says, God wants to save us from what he will do to us when we reject him. Wow, what a great hero. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he'll he'll love us so much, but if we don't love him back the right way, he'll beat us to hell. Yep, exactly. Jonathan, thank you so much for your support and your super chat. I really appreciate your support of me and the channel so much. Jade says, Dylan, I also feel like I was more fundamental and strict with myself than my parents were. Yep. Some Christians even go so far as to keep their children from the evil world because everything outside of their box or worldview is dreadful or demonic to them. Yeah, they poison that well so badly.
The world. You hear that all the time. The world.
And what's amazing is even benign stuff. Like I remember, like Disney was like, be careful. Disney's got some awful non-Christian stuff, and a lot of other things. Of course, Teletubbies. I was too old for Teletubbies, but I heard people warning about Teletubbies. Everything.
Oh, yeah,
everything.
I didn't watch Harry Potter until I was like in college almost.
Yep. I remember even people warning about Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts, like if you went and you got the certain patches were New Age patches. I was like, be careful. The Scouts will be New Age. Everything had some kind of evil part to it. Christianity weaponizes our insecurities about natural biological processes, the war against the flesh to attain higher goals. Yeah, for sure. Christianity, I think, views the flesh as the ID, the base animalistic instinct that we have to try to war against. The more we can put off flesh, the more we can attain enlightenment if God is ethereal. But yeah, God reacts like he has fleshly concerns so many times. Yeah.
Especially in the Old Testament.
Yeah, exactly. With what's that professor's name? I can't pronounce her name. Stavropoulou. I forget, but you know who I'm talking about. Yeah, God has a body, and originally God did have a body. I mean, you could literally like go to the museums and see like an actual like idol that they would have made for Yahweh. He very much was real.
Oh yeah, I've definitely done a lot of that deep dive into like on that kind of history. It's very interesting. Like Dan McClellan's videos and stuff. I've learned a lot about those kind of things. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that was honestly
Joshua Bowen.
Yeah, Josh Bowen's great. Have you seen the Seeing Through Christianity video? Have I shared that before?
I think so. I think I might have looked that up one time. I forget. It's about the mythology stuff.
Yeah, it's like an overview of all the stuff we've been talking about. I'm going to real quickly take a sidetrack and just put that link up here. I think it's a really good one by Bill Zurcher. For anyone that has not seen Seeing Through Christianity, I can't recommend this enough. I mean, like I really can't recommend this enough. This is kind of gonna, if you're like, I don't even know where to start. The whole Greco-Roman mystery cult stuff is just so much. Start with this one, Seeing Through Christianity by Bill Zurcher. Fantastic starting point for getting your feet wet. I'd recommend as well some of the Greco-Roman mystery cult stuff by Dr. Richard Carrier. Yeah, presupposition. Yeah, exactly. Presupposition stuff is pretty nasty. Shell said, I'm sorry, I skipped some. Shell says, yep, and why are the animals in Australia so different? When populations of animals get cut off from the rest, they evolve separately and for that specific environment. Yeah, exactly. Why are there more than 80% of Madagascar animals and plants unique because of the forces of natural evolution? Madagascar split from Africa's mainland 90 million years ago. Yeah.
No, God just made it that way.
Exactly. And they all hopped over to the ark and then hopped back.
Yes.
As soon as you say that you've gone to a liberal college, they attach that you've been brainwashed by having a broader perspective. Really, how about brainwashing by a kid being taught narrowly? Yeah. Madagascar and Australia are great examples. God's ways are higher than ours is always a welcome cop-out for Christians. Religious folks have to maintain a great deal of mental gymnastics because they know they can never be wrong. What else am I wrong about is something the Christians cannot allow themselves to ask. Kevin says, the amount of pain and agony you'd have to witness or cause if you were the creator God is mind-blowing. The amount of cognitive dissonance Christians need to manage at this level is exhausting. Yeah. Jade says, Christianity is not being correct is not even an option or a thought you're supposed to entertain. Exactly. It's not one of the realms of options. It's funny. Just as a quick aside, I was reading that one of the people that I think was working for Trump before, but isn't. But talking about how religious rights that really should, in her opinion, only apply to Christians. That religious rights in this country should only be. Everything is about. We're right. We deserve the podium and the microphone. We deserve the power. we're the right ones. Everyone else is wrong. And if we give you rights in a sense, it's only so that you can live among us, so we can evangelize you, and eventually you'll come to see it our way, one way or the other, by accepting the gospel or by force. It's insane. Yes, never question anything is a famous meme amongst Christians, because questioning is labeled as divisive or blasphemous. Shell says, "Yep, Dylan, you're clearly articulating how you start out very carefully vetting sources until you realize all of them are biased. I wanted to reaffirm about what you're saying. Not only does Christianity deprive us from our true self or nature, they deprive me from taking medication, which were actually of the utmost importance. So it's so detrimental they can never admit it." Yeah, a lot of versions of Christianity do, especially with depression medication.
Yeah, definitely. And that was not something like my family definitely believed in medicine and that was okay and all that. But there definitely was this kind of like, you should pray about it first. You should make sure you're spiritually strong. Like, in other words, you were weak if you had to go to that route, was kind of the implication. Oh, if you need medication, and oh, you just need to
Yep.
get right with God, is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, God can fix this. We need more scripture. You need more gospel. I remember them specifically saying any depression is really just a lack of you understanding and applying the gospel.
And yeah, and that's so harmful. It's such a harmful thing to say.
Yeah, I think I've heard either that directly or as much from John MacArthur. I used to listen to him a lot.
Yeah, me too.
I hope it isn't crude or offensive to put it in these terms, but Christians try to say it's not natural based on biology, but no, it can actually be very healthy for a population. I don't mean to oversimplify the experience. Personal feelings of identity and love are sacred. Yep. Joshua, thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us, Dylan. Thank you for facilitating this. Absolutely. Yep. Thanks, Dylan, for bravely sharing your story. Thank you, Dylan. I still struggle with the effects of purity culture today. Yeah. Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, me too, a little bit.
I mean, it's in many ways, I think I've said this a lot. I'm going to come back to it a lot in projects, but in many ways, for some of us, we would probably, if we really knew the truth of it all, our healing hasn't even truly begun on the deepest levels, because your worldview, you can't see it. You can't just change it because you can't see it. It's very stealthy.
Yes.
And that's why, like I said, shared my story about the worthlessness conversation with my piano teacher. You can think you're thinking one way, and then eventually the cracks show up, and just the reality of it all bursts out, and you're like, oh my goodness, my real beliefs are actually completely opposite. They're not just like a little different. They might be the complete total opposite of what you thought you believed. It's crazy. And that's, I think many people, we've been talked a few weeks ago about how a lot of us are trying to heal from Christianity in Christian ways, because again, it's all part of, however you would have healed from trauma as a Christian, you think you need to heal that way from Christianity. And it's like, this thing has its tentacles deep in us. Sexual purity is a gross patriarchal concept. They wanted to fully own women's reproductive systems. No other men could access her because of his insecurity that his genetic material might not prevail. People don't even realize they're being driven by evolutionary tendencies themselves. Feelings of possessiveness over a mate assures your own genetic material carries on. Yeah, it's gross and nonsensical. They say the evidence for inerrancy of the Bible lies in the original unaltered text. How conveniently unfalsifiable. Yeah, well said. Very well said. Yep, agree, Dylan. When you start to realize that there are really great thinkers and other denominations you've been told are deluded, that helps break down those walls of superiority of our own flavor of Christianity in other denominations. Yeah. And I think a good case in point for me, I had no idea, like literally no idea until the end of Bible college, maybe, that there was such a thing as the Eastern Orthodox Church. Didn't know they existed. Like if you showed me a picture of them, I would have said, I've never, ever, ever seen that. I do not know that they exist. And the fact that they think they're the true church, while I'm thinking these are weirdos who have nothing to do with Christianity, but they're some kind of fringe. I'm like, they're not fringe. They're all over the place. And they're there's huge, masses of people. And it's amazing how you get in these little teeny bubbles, especially I think in Baptist denomination. I was more Baptistic, non-denominational, but Baptistic. And we are so sheltered.
Yeah, for sure.
Jonathan, well, the texts have been wrong from the beginning and have been altered ever since. So how accurate can it be? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Alex O'Connor is awesome. See here. Silver says, hey guys, it seems to me the reason a lot of churches are starting to distance themselves from the hell theory is because they are seeing that what was written did not quite line up with Jesus. I don't think I would agree with that. Jesus says the way to destruction is very wide and most people will go there. The way to life is very narrow. Most people will not go there. I don't think he necessarily was anti-hell, and he said a bunch of other things. By the way, there's a great article by Dr. Richard Carrier. It's about Christmas, but it probably could have been titled "Jesus is a Dick," and he just goes on in the article to say Jesus was really a dick. Jesus being a loving person, and let's just take away the bad stuff. It's not there. He calls a woman, Syrophoenician woman, a dog. He was an arrogant, racist person, and I don't think hell was necessarily something he was deconstructing. But I don't personally think he even existed. But the authors that created his character. But I do think that churches are distancing themselves sometimes because they're realizing that the message just doesn't sell because they want the gentle Jesus that's all love and rainbows and kitty cats, and therefore
I feel like a lot of his teachings really make sense in his context. Like if you've read Ehrman, post-apocalypticism, it's a big idea. I think a lot of those passages that people talk about hell, I think he just meant you're going to be destroyed in the end. I think that's essentially what he was saying. God's going to come back and you're going to be judged. I don't think it was like this hell. I think it was like he's going to destroy you here on this earth because you're evil. And that makes so much more sense in context to like what Jesus would have likely believed based on what we know.
But
it's just interesting.
The Christians, early Christians, were quoting a bunch of stuff from the Qumran community, the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were the children of light, etc. And a lot of those people, they really believed that they were on the verge of the end of the world. I mean, angels were coming back and they were going to fight with them. And so it's definitely whether it's hell itself or just the end of the world stuff. Like you're all, most of you aren't going to make it because you're not on the right. So you're not fighting with the children of light. And
I would definitely recommend Bart Ehrman's Armageddon to talk about some of those things. It really gives good cultural background to that, to anyone listening.
Yeah, he's awesome. I'm hoping to have him on the channel someday. See here, but anyway, Silver Shamrock, I'm not sure if I noticed had another comment. Let me go to your other comment here. I'm guessing the whole reason Jesus came was to an attempt to set the story straight, so to speak. Again, people will differ on whether Jesus was real. I don't personally think he actually existed. But if there was a real Jesus, I don't think he came in a sense for a specific purpose. He was probably just, if he was a guy, he's probably just a desert preacher, just like John the Baptist probably was. These are preachers in the desert trying to call people out to a radical lifestyle of separation from the Roman system and trying to basically get ready for the end of the world.
I mean, it was a cult, like by definition, it was a cult.
Exactly.
And I think your typical crazy street preacher you see today, I think that's probably more like what Jesus was. And I do believe Jesus existed, and to some extent, whatever I don't know how much we know about him, but he was probably one of those kind of guys you typically walk past and you're like, he's crazy. He's always talking about the end.
He's a little bit nuts. Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is crazy. But Silver, if you are, I'm probably reading into a lot of. Let me read your next comment here. It will just seem that a lot of the Old Testament does not line up with what Jesus came preaching and teaching. A lot of it does, a lot of it doesn't. It's a mixed bag. But I would just say that if I'm reading into your comments, if you're questioning though whether or not Jesus is like divine and from God, I definitely encourage you to study the Greco-Roman mystery cults. He was definitely he was a made up. His stories were made up from a lot of other stories. So the idea of did he come for this or come for that? There was a bunch of different people arguing about ultimate reality, about Jesus's identity. It's a bunch of old men fighting. That's what the Gospels are. It's old men fighting about what they want you to believe and to think. It's not relevant. It has nothing to do with your life. I hope you're past that. I might be reading into it, but if you're still on the fence about Christianity, I hope you'll do some digging. It has no pull in your life or on reality. Where did I leave off here? Shell says, morality is not objective. When it comes from God, it's actually the highest form of subjectivity, really. Yeah.
Might makes right.
That's a really good point. Yep, exactly. Jonathan Young says, Sheldy, right? Yep. And the other thing is morality doesn't come from God's. It evolved in us humans as a social species. Yeah. John Barton's History of the Bible was helpful for me. Okay. I'll look that one up. Thank you. Joel Baden's lectures are available online for Old Testament survey. Yep. And see here. Shell says it's a huge barrier to break through, and for a while it's like being buried in an avalanche and not knowing which way is up. Yeah, to break through the ideas of Christianity's truth claims. God doesn't allow anything, take the virgins, etc., as a man-made construct, of course. Yep, the whole text falls apart. You have to completely rebuild your framework for the world from the ground up after breaking that down. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here. Silver, agree to a degree. Okay. There is definitely a lot that needs to be re-examined and discovered. But the important thing is that if this is true, then the God of the Bible is actually the hero and not the villain. It would seem that mankind and his view of God is a problem. Okay. Silver, thank you for playing. Survey says no. I'm going to wrap this up in terms of your comments, but thank you so much. This channel is not here for gaslighting. We're not going to go back to the garbage and the garbage of the Christian worldview. The problem is not our interpretation of God. The problem is that it's the whole God claims are made up. They're all made up. But if you want to pander your God claims somewhere else, there's probably about 1 million other YouTube channels for it. So you're welcome to go there. Who allowed humanity to be deceived by a deceiver? God made us sick to sell Jesus as the cure. In that line of thinking, I mean, Silver, if Jesus is necessary because of deception. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a crazy worldview. Well, I appreciate you all let me diverge there to the comments. And if there's any other final comments in a little bit, we'll maybe read a few more. But Dylan, could you take us to the point of after escaping Christianity, what do you do to start to heal and to reclaim your life?
Yeah, I'd say for a while I didn't really know what to do. You're kind of just in this limbo for a while. I was angry because I knew it wasn't anyone's intention around me for the most part, like growing up to like deceive me, but that's what happened. And I was very bitter and angry about this for a period of time. And I'm still working through that. I would say like I'm getting toward the end of my angry atheist phase, but I would still say I'm in it. I'm definitely an angry atheist. And there's a reason why. And it's not because I hate Christianity and like just in some because it didn't let me be the person I wanted to. That's not the only reason. It's all the damage it does to you. It's the For me it felt like this whole part of my life that I believed was a lie. And not only that, but it really harmed me and no one seems to like take that seriously. No one seems to take seriously how purity culture harms people. No one seems to take seriously how teaching kids about hell is, I think, child abuse. I think that is a horrible thing to do to somebody, is teach them about hell. And first of all, it sounds like the most made up thing in this world is hell. And that sounds like somebody was like wanting somebody to get something from them. They're like, hey, if you don't do this, you're gonna go to this place after you die forever and then you're gonna be tortured. Like that sounds like someone made that up to get something, right? So, but if you're telling people about hell, I think that's a problem, especially a kid if you're trying to teach them about hell. Because to this day, I'm still a little bit afraid of hell. Like I catch myself sometime being worried, like, what if I'm wrong? What if I kind of go to hell? And regardless of which hell it is, too, just a hell of some kind. Like, what if Islam's the real religion or whatever? I don't know. But I just worry about things like that occasionally. Less so as time has gone on, but it definitely is something that lingers.
Is
That
there
and
anything
feelings of
that's
shame. Go ahead.
helped you get over the thought of hell?
Another one of Bart Ehrman's books, actually. I could just advertise for him all day, I think. But Heaven and Hell was really helpful to me because it made me realize, at least from like a Christian perspective, how the idea of hell was not something original to like the larger like Jewish and Christian heritage. That was kind of an innovation after Jesus, pretty much. Well after Jesus, and it had a lot of like historical influence of how that idea came to be, especially from like Greek mythology, like Tartarus, and some of their understanding of the soul and the afterlife heavily influenced that. Whereas like Jewish people before didn't really um, believe in like an afterlife in the Old Testament. So you don't see that in the Old Testament. You don't see an afterlife really. You just see like if someone does come back, they're like a disembodied thing, or they're put back in a body like they're raised from the dead. But you don't see like a heaven or a hell in the Old Testament. And that idea kind of emerged over time. And I think learning about all those details about how the doctrine of hell came to like be a thing in Christianity, I think that was very important for me because it made me realize that it was in fact made up. like when you get to see how it was made up, I think that's what in some way in my brain like made it put it to bed even more, because I already knew all this was BS, but whenever you see how even this thing within that thing is BS, here's why. I think that's also helpful.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, it's
So Heaven
amazing
and
how
Hell is that book. It's really
it's
good.
it's amazing how much learning about the mythology and just the culture of that world, and to see that how it was evolving, especially when you're looking at the afterlife stories of the other cultures of Egyptian mythology. Christianity was obviously affected a lot by Hinduism and Buddhism. You're looking at their reincarnation mythologies. You're looking at the Greco-Roman mystery cults and their, like you mentioned, Tartarus and Hades. All these mythologies, all these stories, all this classic poetry that explain their worldview. And it's like, if in some ways, I think one of the greatest inoculators to Christianity would be a very basic understanding from an early age of the
Yes.
stories of the Greco-Roman time frame. If you not like the stories of like the Roman rulers, but just like what stories were they telling their kids at that time? What
Yeah.
books were they all reading? If you were to start there and then introduce Christianity, I think it would almost be an impossibility for a lot of people because they'd be like, wait a
It's
second.
the
I've
same.
heard this
It's the
story
same thing.
before. Exactly. Anyway,
Yeah.
tell us
Like,
more.
well,
Good.
yeah. It's just interesting how you wake up to that realization. But yeah, I was definitely angry, and like there's still lots of things I feel like that hurt me. And one of the biggest areas was, and this is not something I processed immediately. This was something like a year or two later I was processing with my queerness. That was a huge component of the anger that I didn't realize why I was that angry, but that was a huge reason. And I'll get into that shortly. But this was right around the time I was finishing pharmacy school. Um, my dad passed away suddenly, like around this time, and I kind of had a little bit of I got a little I found God for a few weeks just to deal with him passing, I think.
Mm,
But now I realize that's no, I don't actually believe that. But I was coping. It was the first time I really experienced some serious loss in my life. He died very suddenly. Very difficult for us. But I don't think it really informed anything with my deconstruction otherwise. But yeah, I was coming into residency training, which you do after I got my 4-year doctorate in pharmacy school. I was doing residency training, and I was moving for that. And it's for those that aren't aware, it's a very rigorous time. It is probably the most busiest and stressful time in your career in general, as a pharmacist or a physician or anything like that, because it is an intense level of training, and you're put under a lot of scrutiny. And it's your first time being a real. I was a real pharmacist all of a sudden, and they put a lot of stuff on you. So it's a very stressful time. And leading up to this, I was still processing my deconstruction quite a bit. I was starting to find channels like Paulogia, which I really his channel is awesome. If anyone's not watched Paulogia's channel, check out Paulogia. And then I was starting to listen to things like the Atheist Experience and The Line, some of those old clips, and it was just becoming so clear to me, like, wow, I was just an idiot for believing this. This is so obviously untrue. And you still get more angry about it. You still get a little angry. Um, anyways, I was having a hard time in my personal life dealing with a lot of these things and a lot of other things, like with being queer and depression, and like I buried a lot of those issues down, but they were starting to come out as I was getting really stressed in my work, and I had to take a little break for a period of time, and I had to seek therapy and mental health help. Because it was pretty serious. Like, I'm not gonna get too into the details, but it was very bad. I needed help to talk to somebody about these things, and I spent several months in like a therapy, like sitting in a group talking to people, which is something I never thought I would do in my whole life. I'd never seen a therapist before until I got to that point. And I that was the thing I talked about the most, was religion and how much it hurt me. That was the thing I talked about more than anything. And after a period of time, I started to think, why am I feeling so bad and so depressed and so not me? I started to put two and two together. I started to talk about some of those old things again with my trans identity and some of my feelings, and started to process that. And I came in on the other end. It's been almost 2 years ago now that I finally decided to come out and be myself and be unapologetic about it. And that was the best thing I ever did in my whole life, was just be my true self, because it was like was finally living my life. I was finally being me. I was finally having my true identity that I felt like had been stolen from me for so long. Um, as someone who transitioned, I don't want to say like I transitioned late, like definitely in my 20s, but for any of those that know about trans healthcare, most trans people would really like to transition like at puberty, so they don't have to go through the puberty of the opposite of what their sex is, because that's a very distressing thing because you turn into the thing you don't want to be. And I feel like that was stolen from me. What if I had been in a household that was more accepting and not Christian and somewhere else? What if I had, you know, back in college decided to actually go through with this 10 years, like almost 10 years ago now, like thinking about it. All these things start to come up in my mind, and you feel like all that shame and all that self-hatred and all the depression, all these relationships that were informed this way, all these ideas you used to think, you just it's hard. You feel like you start to realize Christianity stole so much from you, and it hurts. And people, unless you've experienced that, that type of sentiment is typically dismissed as, oh, don't be dramatic. Like, it's just you grew up religious, so what? Like a lot of people do, and get over it. A lot of those people, in my experience, were not as religious as people like I was or you were, Tim. And it hurts. It's a deep hurt, that feeling like something was taken from you and you just realized it, and how much of your life was stolen. But you learn to come out the other end of it in a very like, I come out so much stronger for it. And in some ways it's like, would I even be me if I didn't grow up Christian and go through all this stuff? You know, that's part of who I am. That's like part of my story. It's part of how I got to where I am. That's how I healed. And so in a way I feel like I wouldn't be this strong of a person had I not gone through some of those things and some of those realizations. And yeah, I'd say religion was it harmed me. It harms a lot of people. And I could see it. I can see it around me all the time now, how much religion's hurting people. And it really bothers me. And so I would consider myself little a anti-theist for sure. I would say,
Yeah.
I'm intellectually speaking agnostic atheist, but I am certainly against religion in
Mm,
general because I'm against things that are untrue. And I think religion's untrue. I,
yeah.
I definitely skepticism is what I rest myself on.
And things certainly that are hurting a lot of people in this world, especially with current administration stuff, but even long before that. Can I ask, just out of curiosity, you know, being trans, you must face an awful lot of trolls, an awful lot of people that want to attack you. Um, there is, certainly when I was growing up, we would hear people use the term coming out to refer to people who are gay coming out. Obviously, it would have come into play in other conversations. But as you've shared your journey with people, especially Christians, what is the typical response, and how do you deal with what must be, I imagine, at times, pretty much an onslaught of negativity and just people. I mean, they're already going to attack you for obviously not
Mhm.
believing in Jesus anymore, for not being a Christian, but it's sort of doubled and tripled. Just how do you deal with that whole part of the backlash?
So I would say, despite me living in Tennessee still, I have found that it has been much easier than I thought it would be to be openly trans. Now, granted, I'm in Memphis, Tennessee, so it's like a pretty blue city, and people don't typically give me a hard time about it. It does happen. You get looks, people stare at me. Um, you just learn to kind of get over that. Rarely do people are kind of cowards, I notice. Even if they like wanted to say something to me or really didn't like me for this, they're not going to come up and say it. They're just going to stare at you and maybe give you a dirty look, and that's about it. Um, but like one time when I was at work, I was going down the hall, in the hospital, and some lady, not a patient, it was like some visitor or something. She was on the phone and she like looked at me and she's like, um, excuse me. And I was like, oh, hey, yeah, yes, ma'am. Can I help you? And she's like, Jesus loves you. Jesus loves you. And she kept repeating that over and over again. Jesus loves you. And you need to make sure that you take care of yourself before it's too late. Okay. And then she walked away, and I was just like stunned. I was like, whoa. So that kind of sentiment has happened like once or twice. That's the big one. But like that's been
Wow.
mostly it. No one's really said anything directly hateful to me, but you do get the feeling sometimes that people have a certain feeling about you. But I will also say I think I have surprised a lot of people too. Whenever I go into their rooms or whatever, I'm talking to a patient. They don't expect to see me walk in and then for me to explain, spend 15, 20 minutes talking to somebody about the new drug they're taking and why they're taking it and all the safety things. And I noticed I come out of there and they seem to have a different opinion of me than whenever I walked in. I'll just say that. So I think that goes a long way. But online, you definitely not necessarily direct at me specifically, but what's happening to trans people right now is really horrendous and it's really Nazi-esque, to be very honest, Tim.
Yeah.
What's happening? You don't see this a lot in the main news, but if you are in trans spaces and you follow the things that Republican lawmakers are doing or Christian organizations are doing in all these different states, new laws they're passing, new executive orders from the president, these things are horrible, horrible things. And they exist just to hurt people like me. And they don't help anybody, despite what they claim. That's not the reason they're doing it, is to help anybody. They're doing it because they hate us. And it's very obvious if you understand like that far right ideology. And by the way, this is a good time to mention I was very politically conservative, like through all this time until like the last couple of years.
Hmm.
And I definitely slowly started to lose some things, but I was like a hardcore like libertarian kind of conservative. I was one of those people that like I didn't want to limit people, but I also could still think what they're doing was wrong. Like, yeah, I'll let gay people do their thing, but even though I think that's wrong, that was kind of my stand. But I was like a very conservative, listen to like Ben Shapiro and like I remember watching Tucker Carlson a lot in my home like, when I was growing up.
Hmm.
Like that was the kind of thing I was into, and now I couldn't be any further from that. I'm quite on the other end now, for a lot of reasons. But yeah, it's what's happening right now is quite a lot, and I would just say, like, if you know any trans people out there, definitely be there as a support from them because I feel like I'm weathering those things pretty well, and I'm privileged with like what I do for a living and where I am, but not everybody is like that. So if you know any trans people, please support them. They need it a lot right now because it's pretty. Nothing big has like actually happened yet in like some historic kind of way, but things are making certain laws are making life harder for people like me around the country, especially in red states. I mean, Tennessee just passed a few things I'm not very happy about either.
Yeah. I saw Florida did recently as well. Yeah, it's very heartbreaking. It's very heartbreaking, and I feel like we need to be creating safe spaces. We really do, and
Absolutely.
even I feel like people like me who have deconstructed and deconverted from Christianity, we our journey may not be the same as your journey, but there's the similarity of like our we know that when we tell the truth about what we think, just the basics, and we're not even trying to, before we even say I'm trying to change anybody's opinion about anything, just to say this is just where I'm landing. Like you
Hmm.
keep your beliefs, you do your thing, I'll do mine. But just the very fact of my existence and my being different from them as a non-Christian is so offensive to them, and it's so scary in some ways. And at the moment they're not coming after us, but you don't know that it could happen. It could, so this world could change to a point where we just right now we'd say that's unfathomable, that'll never happen in this country. How many people
I,
probably said that in Germany,
I've been saying that the last couple of years. I'm like, I didn't think this could happen in my country. And here, and things are starting to happen. They're not like that yet, but they are in that going that direction. And it scares me, Tim. It scares me quite a lot as like an American, as someone who's
Yeah.
trans, because first people to go in Nazi Germany were trans people, were
Mm.
gay people. In fact, one of the more famous pictures of a Nazi book burning is the Institute of Sexology, which was like one of the biggest, most progressive LGBT study centers at that time in Germany. They burned it all. Stuff that's permanently gone because they didn't have computers to back it up.
Yeah.
It's just gone.
Mm.
And it's scary to think about. And when you step back and think about it, you're like, why would you hurt these people? Like, what am I doing that's hurting anybody? I'm just living my life. That's most trans people's experience. And it really sucks to be targeted for something that you don't feel like you had a control over and you're not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like I've grown to understand that a lot more. Like my boyfriend, he's black and he has a lot of unique challenges and struggles and way people perceive him that I didn't grow up experiencing. And he understands, at least on some level, kind of my experience on some way of people looking at you different, looking at you like a threat, looking at you like you're a problem, looking at you like they don't want you to be around them. It's really sad that so many people feel that way, because I don't think that's what Jesus taught at all. Jesus taught the exact opposite.
Hmm. I think it's a great time for us to, in many ways, look for the places where people need safe places, and I certainly hope that channels like mine and others in the community are that and can remain that and continue to be that. And just that there's a sense that I know that some people are going to, even as I've come across atheists who are against transgender people, and like
Yeah,
there's still a fundamentalism that can be woven into our communities even on this side of Christianity. And I
absolutely.
hope that we can find safe places and be able to talk about all of our stories, both especially about leaving Christianity, of course, that's my main channel's focus, but about the rest of it. And it's like there's a big opportunity for us to say we will open our eyes more than ever to the people that we're hurting, because I think a lot of us really were, as Christians, so willing to shut off the empathy and to say, I don't care who's hurting. You do it God's way, or I really, I hate to say it this way, but I just don't care about you. You're going to get what's coming to you. Like the lady that you mentioned that came up and said to you, but you better, turn to God and turn to
Yeah.
His love before it's too late. Like, well, what's the before it's too late? Are we talking about the Godfather
Now,
who's the crime boss is gonna come get me with his baseball bat? Like, you're gonna he's gonna send the angels to take me to send me to hell, whatever. Um, what are you saying? Like, God is loving, but His love has an expiration date. Like He's not really gonna love me for much longer. And you realize that they're talking about a very sadistic, psychopathic God.
oh
And
yeah, the rise of Christian nationalism has been very scary,
yeah,
very scary. Like, because that was stuff I didn't believe when I was like, these people are nuts, and that was even old me would have thought that.
yeah, yeah. I
And
think I would have as well.
it's really scary.
Yeah, I think I would have also had some surprises. I don't think I would have agreed with a lot of the Christian nationalism. Although there is a part of me that wonders, and I'm so glad that I escaped before it came out to this point where it's like it's so horrible. But I think it's hopefully a lot of Christians are being brought to a point of saying, I need to figure out what I do believe about this and take a stand if it's wrong. And I have
Yeah,
admittedly seen some Christians say it's wrong, but
I have to. I
anyway,
have
I
to for
digress.
sure.
Well, can I
But
ask
go ahead.
1 second?
Oh,
So I had a quick troll here.
yeah.
Could you just wrap us up with maybe a final word for anyone that's going through the hardest part of leaving Christianity? When you look at people going through this, it is so painful. They know that they're going to
It
lose
is.
family or friends or jobs or whatever. But like you mentioned, even if no one else around you knows or gives you ruffles their feathers over it, the reality is you have lost your
Yes.
relationship with what you perceived was a real God. You had a real relationship with the God of the universe, and you had a real expectation of the afterlife and of heaven and of all these things. And you completely planted your flag on that worldview. And it's even if nothing else is negative in life from that point on, like just losing that is so painful. For
It
someone
really
that's
is.
just starting to ask those questions, what would you say?
I would say this is something I heard Bart Ehrman echo too, and I kind of internally thought this as well. But God's a God of truth, and I need to go where the truth leads me, because that's where God is. Even if the truth's not what I thought it was, I need to follow the truth. And I think the first thing I had to do was realize what should I be basing my beliefs on? And I realized evidence was what I needed to base my beliefs on. I would say go where the evidence takes you, whatever that end is, but try to be as intellectually honest as possible with yourself. And just know that if you are already in this place where you are finding all these things are crumbling around you and you're trying to like keep it together, just know that it's going to be okay. It really is. I mean, Tim, I know you've talked about this with yourself a little bit, like the turmoil you're in. And then eventually you're like, yeah, it's fine. Like, it's actually better than if I had still been a Christian. Like, I'm so happy. I am so happy I'm not a Christian anymore. It is like one of the biggest joys of my life that I'm not a Christian, because I feel like I've been able to heal and remove myself from something terrible that I perceive as very terrible. Um, Especially with my experience growing up in it. That's why I think it's terrible. And so just know that if you listen to any of those atheists out there that used to be Christians, they're going to say the same thing I'm saying: is it's going to get better. You're going to get through it. It's not always going to be like this life-changing feeling you have when you first realize your religion isn't true. So stick to the truth, be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, and quite honestly, therapy with a secular therapist, someone who is not trying to convert you. Talk to a therapist.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
100%.
what I
And
would say.
hopefully along the way, find some community, even if it's just one person, but hopefully many people that can support you. Cause we will go through this process so much more smoothly if we don't go through it alone. So,
Absolutely. And
mm,
your channel, Tim, has been great for that. Whenever I was in therapy, like for months, I was processing all that religious deconstruction. I would watch a lot of your videos, and a lot of these people on this channel, just regular old people telling their stories. I felt like I get it. I understand that pain you're talking about. I felt that. I felt the shame here. I felt how hard that was when I realized this wasn't true. You start to
mm,
see yourself in all these people, and you realize that like we all together have experienced something that we share. And I think that was worth a lot to know there were other people out there like me that were really dealing with something rough, because it was hard. It was hard to deconstruct, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me as well.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And yeah, it's amazing once you get plugged in enough to have some kind of community. I mean, it's made a world of difference to me. I know I'm sort of like, I look like the facilitator, but I'm certainly the recipient of a lot of kindness and support from other people who are helping me to be my community. So it's been just a blessing and an honor to be part of it. And just in many ways, unfortunately, we can't always call our own blood families our closest people in our lives. Some people get to keep that, but not everybody. But in a lot of ways, sometimes our community becomes that family lifeline and or sort of our chosen family. But let me just wrap up by reading a few final comments. I see just a few came in, not too many. Let's see here. Roman Catholics exposed. I'm not sure what that icon's supposed to be, but glad you're here. Shannon's great here. Shannon, thank you so much for being here. Proud of you, Dylan. I admire your strength. The secular scriptures. Thank you, Dylan. We are only a threat to backwards ideology, and for that they should be scared. But being scared of trans, ridiculous. You're gorgeous and perfect.
Thank
Mm.
you.
And WCN are terrified of being supplanted by other ideologies, that they are turning into the villain that they're so scared of. Yeah, it's amazing. And it's so many things in this world are like that. People go after what they call different and dangerous or monsters or whatever, and they turn into monsters. We're seeing, I mean, we look at even MAGA's turning against itself. They're even admitting, some of the biggest voices in MAGA are saying, whoa, like what the hell is happening here? It's great to see it crumbling, but at the same time, it's like, it was kind of like obvious, like 10 years ago. But they say God cannot lie, then you have to follow truth. So if you have to supplant truth to keep following God, then what are you even following? Yeah. Thank you, Dylan. Yep, this channel is essentially non-clinical group therapy. So helpful to know that we're not alone. Yep. Yeah, the not being alone is huge. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Dylan. This has been great. I definitely would hope we're going to cross paths again at some point. And if you do ever start a YouTube channel, I think you'd be a great candidate for starting a YouTube channel. If you do ever do it, come on back on and we'll make sure we put that on blast. But was there any final thoughts you wanted to add before we wrap up?
I think that was it. Just be kind to yourselves out there if y'all are going through deconstruction. It is a long and arduous process, and just be patient with yourself. You're gonna get there.
Yeah, great word. Yeah, so many of us, I love that. So many of us have not been kind to ourselves, and that makes us not safe in our skin and our thoughts. Yeah, be kind to yourself is a great word, great final word. Well, thank you so much. We've been speaking with Dylan Adams. Dylan, thank you so much for sharing your story today. And
Thank you so
everyone,
much, Tim.
absolutely, my pleasure. And everyone, thank you so much for being a part of our lives and letting us be a part of yours. And we'll be in touch soon. Just so you know, too, in terms of anyone that's going to jump into the next interview, I've got an interview, not today, but tomorrow. I've got an interview with Gail Hope at 10 a.m. Eastern. And I've got, I think, 2 interviews this upcoming Saturday. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be sort of back-to-back, like double header there. It's going to be a busy Saturday and potentially even a busy Sunday. But some great interviews as well next week. I've got 3 or 4, including one late at night here, but someone in Australia the next morning. So a whole bunch of them. The period of my time when I've got like a wide open schedule is coming, and I've tried to like just pack it if I can, push myself as far as my body will let me. But great interviews. And again, if anyone else wants to jump in and share your story, please reach out to me. I'd love to have you on the channel. And one last comment from Shannon: super inspirational, Dylan. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.